The rain fell in sheets, a relentless curtain that turned the city into a blur of gray and neon. Under the flickering glow of a street lamp, an old woman stood, her frail frame trembling as water soaked through her tattered coat. She clutched a worn leather bag to her chest, as if it held the last fragment of her world. Ethan Harper, 29 and perpetually late, hurried through the downpour, his black umbrella barely shielding him from the storm's wrath. His phone buzzed with unread messages, work deadlines, a friend's canceled plans, his mother's gentle nagging about visiting home. He barely noticed the woman until her voice, soft yet piercing, cut through the rain's roar. "Excuse me, young man," she said, her eyes glinting like polished stones under her soaked scarf. "May I share your umbrella? Just until the bus comes." Ethan froze, caught off guard. The city had taught him to keep moving, to avoid strangers' pleas. But something in her voice, fragile, yet weighted with a quiet dignity, made him pause. He glanced at the empty street, the bus stop signs swaying in the wind. No bus was coming, not in this storm. "Sure," he said, stepping closer, tilting his umbrella to cover her. She shuffled under it, her small frame dwarfed by his shadow. Up close, her face was a map of wrinkles, each line telling a story he couldn't read. Her hands, gnarled and trembling, gripped the bag tighter. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "It's been a long time since someone stopped." Ethan nodded, unsure what to say. He wasn't the type for small talk, especially not with strangers. But as they stood there, the rain drumming on the umbrella, an odd silence settled between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it felt heavy, like the air before lightning strikes. "What's your name?" he asked, more to fill the void than out of curiosity. "Clara," she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something beyond the rain. "And yours?" "Ethan." He shifted his weight, glancing at his watch. The bus was late, and he was already behind schedule. But Clara's presence tethered him to the moment, her quiet strength demanding he stay. They stood in silence for a while, the world reduced to the patter of rain and the occasional splash of a passing car. Ethan's mind wandered to his own life, his cubicle job, the endless emails, the apartment that felt more like a storage unit than a home. He was always running, always chasing something just out of reach. Yet here, under this umbrella, time seemed to slow. Clara spoke again, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "You ever feel like you're waiting for something, but you don't know what it is?" Ethan blinked, startled by the question. It was as if she'd reached into his thoughts and pulled them out. "Yeah," he admitted. "All the time." She nodded, her lips curling into a faint smile. "That's how it starts. You wait, and you walk, and you hope the rain stops before you realize you're soaked through." He didn't know what to make of that. Her words felt like a riddle, one he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Before he could respond, a figure emerged from the rain, a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, her hood pulled tight against the storm. She stopped a few feet away, staring at Clara with wide, almost frantic eyes. "Grandma," the young woman called, her voice cracking. "Is that you?" Clara's head snapped up, her grip on the bag tightening. For a moment, Ethan thought she might bolt, but she stayed rooted, her eyes locked on the girl. "Lila," she whispered, disbelief threading through her voice. Ethan stepped back, suddenly feeling like an intruder. The young woman Lila rushed forward, ignoring the rain, and threw her arms around Clara. "I've been looking for you," she sobbed. "For months. Why didn't you call?" Clara's face crumpled, a mix of relief and pain. "I didn't want to burden you," she said softly. "Not after everything." Ethan stood there, umbrella still raised, watching the reunion unfold. He didn't know their story, but the raw emotion in Lila's voice, the way Clara's shoulders shook as she hugged her granddaughter, told him enough. This wasn't just a chance meeting in the rain. This was something broken being pieced back together. Lila pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Come home, Grandma. Please. We'll figure it out." Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering to Ethan, then back to Lila. "I don't know if I can." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He didn't understand the weight of Clara's words, but he felt them. He wanted to say something, to help, but what could he offer? He was just a stranger with an umbrella. "Clara," he said, surprising himself. "You don't have to decide now, but maybe just take the first step." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, he thought she might argue, but then she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "Maybe you're right," she said. "Maybe it's time." Lila took Clara's hand, and the two began to walk away, the rain swallowing their figures. Ethan stood alone, his umbrella now shielding only himself. He felt a strange mix of emptiness and warmth, as if he'd witnessed something sacred but fleeting. As he turned to leave, he noticed something on the ground, a small, waterlogged photograph, half buried in a puddle. He picked it up, wiping the rain from its surface. It showed a younger Clara, smiling beside a man with kind eyes, a little girl Lila, he guessed, grinning between them. The edges were worn, the colors faded, but the love in their faces was unmistakable. Ethan tucked the photo into his pocket, unsure why he couldn't leave it behind. The rain kept falling, but it felt different now, less like a burden and more like a cleansing. Ethan couldn't shake the image of Clara's face, her eyes carrying a lifetime of unspoken stories. He sat in his apartment that night, the photograph on his kitchen counter, its edges curling from the rain. Outside, the storm raged on, a reminder of the moment that had shifted something inside him. He didn't know why he kept the photo. It wasn't his to keep, yet throwing it away felt wrong, like discarding a piece of someone's soul. He studied the faces again, Clara, younger and radiant, the man, whose smile mirrored hers, and little Lila, all pigtails and joy. Who were they to each other? Why had Clara been alone in the rain, clutching that bag like it was her only anchor? The next morning, the rain had softened to a drizzle, but the city still felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of Clara's words. Ethan went through his routine coffee, emails, the hum of his office, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the bus stop. He wondered where Clara was now, if she'd gone with Lila, if she'd found whatever she was searching for. On his lunch break, he wandered to a nearby cafe, the photograph tucked in his wallet. He didn't know why he brought it, only that it felt like a tether to something real, something beyond his predictable life. As he sipped his coffee, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," said an older man at the next table. He had a weathered face, a gray beard, and eyes that sparkled with quiet mischief. "Mind if I join you?" Ethan hesitated. He wasn't in the mood for company, but the man's warmth was disarming. "Sure," he said, gesturing to the empty chair. The man introduced himself as Sam, a retired librarian who spent his days people-watching and collecting stories. "Everyone's got one, you know," he said, stirring his tea. "A story. You just gotta listen for it." Ethan's fingers brushed the wallet in his pocket. Before he could stop himself, he pulled out the photograph and slid it across the table. "Found this last night," he said, "in the rain. It belongs to someone I met, but I don't know how to get it back to her." Sam's eyes widened as he studied the photo. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, his voice softening. "That's Clara. Clara Hammond. You know her?" Ethan leaned forward, his heart racing. "Knew her," Sam corrected, his gaze distant. "Years ago, when I worked at the library. She'd come in every week, always with a little girl, her granddaughter, I think. Clara was a teacher once, loved books more than anyone I ever met. But then something happened. She stopped coming." Ethan's mind raced. "What happened?" Sam shrugged, but his eyes were heavy. "Life, I suppose. Her husband passed, from what I heard. After that, she just faded, like she was carrying too much to keep showing up." Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. The man in the photo, Clara's husband. The weight in her eyes made sense now, but it only deepened the mystery. Why was she alone in the rain? Why hadn't she called Lila? "You should find her," Sam said, pushing the photo back. "That picture's more than a memory. It's a piece of her heart." Ethan spent the rest of the day distracted, his thoughts tangled in Clara's story. That evening, he walked back to the bus stop, half hoping to see her again. The street was empty, the rain reduced to a fine mist. He stood there, replaying their conversation, her words about waiting for something unknown echoing in his mind. On impulse, he pulled out his phone and searched for Clara Hammond. The internet offered Litly a few old articles about a beloved high school teacher, a mention of a community award from decades ago. But one link caught his eye, a local charity's website, listing volunteers from years past. Clara's name was there, alongside a grainy photo that matched the woman in his memory. The charity was only a few blocks away. Ethan didn't know what he was doing, but his feet moved before his mind could catch up. When he arrived, the building was quiet, its windows glowing softly against the dusk. A woman at the front desk looked up, her smile kind but tired. "I'm looking for someone," Ethan said, showing her the photo. "Clara Hammond. Do you know her?" The woman's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and sadness. "Clara? She hasn't been here in a while. Used to volunteer, helped kids learn to read. But after her husband died, she stopped coming. Said she didn't have it in her anymore." Ethan's chest tightened. "Do you know where I can find her?" The woman hesitated, then scribbled an address on a slip of paper. "This is where she used to live. I don't know if she's still there, but good luck." Ethan thanked her and left, the address burning a hole in his pocket. He didn't know why he was doing this, why he cared so much about a stranger's story. But something about Clara, her quiet strength, her hidden pain had hooked him. He couldn't let it go. The address led him to a small, weathered house on the edge of the city. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, but a faint light glowed through the curtains. He knocked, his heart pounding. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open, and there stood Clara, her eyes wide with shock. "You," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "How did you find me?" Clara's voice trembled, not with fear, but with something deeper, recognition, perhaps, or disbelief. Ethan stood on her doorstep, the photograph in his hand, feeling like he'd stumbled into a story he didn't fully understand. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and unspoken questions. "I found this," Ethan said, holding out the photo. "You dropped it last night. I wanted to make sure you got it back." Clara's eyes locked on the photograph, and for a moment, she seemed to vanish into it. Her fingers brushed its surface, tracing the faces frozen in time. "My Henry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "And Lila, so small." Ethan shifted, unsure what to say. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, "but it felt important." Clara looked up, her gaze piercing. "Why do you care?" she asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. "You don't know me." He didn't have an answer, not really. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because you reminded me of someone. Or maybe I just couldn't walk away." Clara studied him, then stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "It's cold out there." Her home was small, cluttered with relics of a life well lived, books stacked on every surface, faded photographs in mismatched frames, a quilt draped over a worn armchair. Ethan sat awkwardly on the couch, the photograph still in his hand. Clara settled across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "I haven't had a visitor in years," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Not since Henry passed. People move on, you know. Life does that." Ethan nodded, thinking of his own life, the way he'd drifted from friends, from family, from anything that felt like home. "What happened?" he asked, glancing at the photo. "If you don't mind me asking." Clara's smile was bittersweet. "Henry was my anchor," she said. "We built a life together, teaching, volunteering, raising our daughter. Lila's mother. But when our daughter died car accident, 10 years ago, it broke us. Henry got sick soon after, and when he was gone, I didn't know how to keep going." Ethan's throat tightened. He thought of Lila's desperate hug in the rain, the way she'd clung to Clara. "But Lila," he said, "she was looking for you." Clara's eyes glistened. "I know. I pushed her away. Thought I was protecting her. She's young, full of life. I didn't want my grief to weigh her down." Before Ethan could respond, the door burst open, and Lila stormed in, her face a mix of anger and relief. "Grandma, you can't just disappear like that," she said, her voice shaking. "I've been calling, searching. Do you know how scared I was?" Clara stood, her hands trembling. "Lila, No." Lila cut her off, tears streaming down her face. "You don't get to decide what I can handle. You're my family. My only family." Ethan felt like he was witnessing something private, something sacred. He started to stand, ready to leave, but Lila turned to him, her eyes fierce. "You're the guy from last night," she said. "Why are you here?" "I found her," Ethan said simply, holding up the photo. "I wanted to return this." Lila's expression softened, but only slightly. She took the photo, her fingers lingering on it. "This was the last time we were all together," she said, "before everything fell apart." Clara reached for Lila's hand, and this time, Lila didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Ethan watched them, feeling both out of place and inexplicably connected. He thought of his own family, his mother's unanswered texts, the distance he'd let grow between them. Clara's story wasn't his, but it felt like a mirror, reflecting his own quiet regrets. "I should go," he said, standing. "I'm glad you got the photo back." Clara stopped him, her hand light but firm on his arm. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "But you did. That means something." Ethan nodded, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. As he stepped outside, the night air was cool, the stars peeking through the clouds. He walked home, the city quieter now, but his mind was loud with questions. What was he running from? What was he waiting for, like Clara had said? The next day, Ethan called his mother. It was a small step, but it felt like breaking through a wall he'd built himself. Her voice was warm, surprised, and for the first time in months, he didn't rush the conversation. He told her about Clara, about the rain, about the photo. She listened, and when she laughed, it felt like home. Back at Clara's house, life began to shift. Lila moved in, filling the quiet spaces with her energy, her determination to rebuild what grief had torn apart. Clara started volunteering again, teaching kids to read at the charity, her hands steadier now, her smile a little brighter. But she kept the photograph on her mantle, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she'd found. Ethan didn't see Clara again, but her story stayed with him, a quiet current beneath his days. He started noticing the world more, the strangers on the bus, the stories behind their eyes. He didn't know where his own story was going, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid to find out. Weeks passed, but the memory of that rainy night clung to Ethan like damp clothes. He walked the city with new eyes, noticing the small things, the way a barista smiled at a regular, the graffiti on a wall that read, "You are enough." Clara's words echoed in his mind. You ever feel like you're waiting for something, but you don't know what it is? He was starting to understand. At work, Ethan's routine felt less like a cage. He spoke up in meetings, shared ideas he'd once kept to himself. His colleagues noticed, one even joking that he'd caught some kind of spark. But it wasn't just work. He called his mother more often, visited his childhood home, sat with her over coffee and old photo albums. Each conversation chipped away at the distance he'd let grow. One evening, on a whim, he returned to the charity where Clara had volunteered. The woman at the desk recognized him, her smile warmer this time. "You're the photo guy," she said. "Clara's been asking about you." Ethan's heart skipped. "She's here." The woman nodded, pointing to a room down the hall. "Reading to the kids. Go see for yourself." He followed her directions, pausing at the doorway. Clara sat in a circle of children, a book open in her lap, her voice steady and warm as she read about a boy and his dragon. The kids were rapt, their eyes wide with wonder. Lila sat nearby, organizing books, her face softer than Ethan remembered. When Clara finished, the kids clapped, and she looked up, spotting Ethan. Her smile was small but genuine. "You again," she said, standing. "You're persistent." Ethan laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." Clara gestured to the room, the kids now chattering and flipping through books. "Better," she said. "Thanks to you." "And Lila." Lila joined them, brushing her hands on her jeans. "You're the umbrella guy," she said, her tone lighter now. "Grandma told me what you did. That photo, it meant everything." Ethan shrugged, embarrassed. "It was nothing." "It wasn't," Clara said firmly. "You stopped. Most people don't. They talk for a while, the conversation easy, like old friends catching up." Clara told him about her teaching days, how she'd loved watching kids discover stories. Lila shared her own struggles losing her mother, searching for Clara, trying to rebuild their bond. Ethan listened, feeling the weight of their resilience, their refusal to let grief win. As he left the charity, Clara handed him a small buka-worn copy of The Little Prince. "For you," she said. "It's about seeing with the heart. You're good at that." Ethan took the book, his throat tight. "Thank you," he said, meaning it more than he could express. That night, he read the book cover to cover, its words sinking into him like rain into parched earth. He thought about Clara, about Lila, about the man in the photo who'd been Clara's anchor. He thought about his own life, the things he'd been too afraid to face: love, loss, the messy beauty of connection. The next morning, Ethan woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He signed up to volunteer at the charity, starting small, helping with book drives. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step toward something bigger, something real. He started writing, not emails or reports, but stories, fragments of the city's pulse, the people he'd passed by for too long. Months later, he saw Clara again at a community event, her laughter bright as she read to a new group of kids. Lila was there, too, her arm around Clara's shoulders. They waved at Ethan, and he waved back, a quiet joy settling in his chest. He didn't know their whole story, and they didn't know his, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They'd crossed paths in the rain, and somehow, that had been enough. Ethan walked home under a clear sky, the book in his pocket, the city alive around him. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was living, one step at a time, trusting that the path would reveal itself. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, he could still hear the rain, soft and steady, washing the world clean.